Hi, in this video we are going to go over the principles of vowel contraction. This is something that our textbook doesn't really cover. In chapter 4 they begin to introduce you to contracted vowels, and they give you the patterns for vowel contraction with each contract verb, but they don't really give you the principles behind vowel contraction in general. So that's something I want to do with you today. There are three basic principles behind how Greek vowels contract, and two of them have two parts. Let's start with the easiest one. The first principle is that like vowels lengthen. That is, vowels that have like sounds simply lengthen. Okay? So if you have an alpha plus an alpha, that simply lengthens into a long alpha. If you have an epsilon plus an epsilon, that sound lengthens. Now you may think that an epsilon plus could turn into an eta. It doesn't, however. It turns into another vowel combination with a similar sound, epsilon iota, a. Omicron plus omicron, you might think that's going to turn into an omega. It also does not. It turns into another similar sound, oo. If you have a vowel contracting with an already long vowel, it simply lengthens even more. Now there's going to be some principles of accent involved in what we're doing here. This is actually very helpful for learning accent, to learn the vowel combinations. If you're not clear on the rules of accent yet, go and check out the previous 3 videos on the rules of accentuation. An alpha combined with another long alpha simply becomes a super long alpha. And now, because I've got two short alphas in this long alpha, making 2 mori, plus another short alpha gives us 3 mori, and our rules of accentuation tell us that if we have 3 mori in the same vowel or diphthong, that vowel or diphthong is going to take a circumflex accent. So we can mark here a circumflex over this alpha because we know that it's already got 3 alphas embedded in it. Similarly here, when you add an epsilon to the diphthong a, it retains the same sound, a, but because it's now got 3 mori in it, we can see that it is a super a. Same with oo plus omicron, simply becomes super oo. And epsilon plus eta becomes super eta. And omicron plus omega becomes super omega. That is the first principle of vowel contractions. When you have like vowels in combination, they simply lengthen. Now, if you have unlike vowels, one of 2 things can happen. If your vowel combination has an O sound in it, an omicron or an omega, that O sound will always win. And it doesn't matter in what order they come. I can have an alpha plus an omega, or an omega plus an alpha, and it comes out the same. The O sound dominates no matter the order of the vowels that are being contracted. So an alpha plus an omega combine, and the O sound wins, so we're left with an omega. And not just any omega, because I know that we've got an omega, which is already long, contains 2 mori in it, plus an alpha, which is another mori. I can tell you that's a super omega. So we put a circumflex over it. Same here, no big surprises. Omega plus epsilon becomes super omega. Eta plus omega also becomes super omega. Anytime you're combining a vowel with an omega, you're going to end up with an omega. A super omega, in fact, okay? Omega with a circumflex. When you're combining vowels with an omicron, they're not necessarily lengthened. If the vowel that you're combining it with is already long, if it's an eta, then that O sound lengthens again into an omega. So we're getting omegas most of the time, and an alpha plus an omicron, since alpha is also a rather long noise in itself, even a short alpha, when you combine it with an omicron, you also get an omega. But this time I'm not going to put a circumflex over that. I don't have 3 mori, only 2. Alpha and omega, both short, there's only 2 mori, so my accent is not necessarily going to be on this vowel. Epsilon plus omicron is the one standout here. I've got no omega. Instead, I've got an O sound and a longer O sound than simply aw, but it is not O, it is oo. So whenever you're combining vowels with an O sound, most of the time you're going to get omegas. Most of the time they're going to be omega with a circumflex, unless you're dealing with epsilon plus omicron, in which case you get oo. The next possibility that might happen is you don't have an O sound. In that case, if you've got an alpha, an epsilon, or an eta, the order of their combination does matter. And the first sound to appear is the sound that's going to dominate. So if you have an alpha plus an epsilon, for example, the alpha sound is going to win, and you're going to get an alpha, not just any alpha, but a long alpha. Alpha plus an eta. Also, I'm going to get a long alpha, but this time I've got 2 mori in the eta plus 1 more in the alpha. It gives me 3 mori in the same letter, so I know that one's going to carry a circumflex. So if I'm beginning my vowel combination with an alpha, I'm going to retain the alpha, and if it's combined with a long vowel, it's going to carry a circumflex. If epsilon is the vowel that comes first, I'm going to retain that noise, but I'm going to lengthen it. Plus an a gives me an eta. Plus an eta, plus a gives me an eta as well, but again, since I've got 3 mori in this combination, I can go ahead and mark that with a circumflex. Here as well, now I'm beginning with etas, so I'm going to keep the eta sound, and because eta is long and I'm combining it with another short, I know that I'm going to have a circumflex as well. So in both of these scenarios, I get eta with a circumflex. The third basic principle concerns combining a vowel with a diphthong. And again, there are 2 possibilities for this if I have a like sound or an unlike sound. If I have an unlike sound, again, the basic principle is that that sound is simply going to lengthen. If the vowel is long, the iota will be written underneath the vowel. It will become a iota subscript. Some texts use iota adscript, so be careful of those. Most texts, I think, now use iota subscript. So here's how you go about combining these. You combine the first vowels first. So I'm using the rules above for like vowels to combine the 2 like vowels, and then I'm going to add the iota in last. Alpha plus an alpha gives me a long alpha, and the iota is going to go underneath this vowel because it's long. And because that iota adds another mora, I can mark it with a circumflex. So I don't need to write in a macron on this vowel combination because the circumflex by itself shows me that that vowel is long. If I have epsilon plus a, I'm going to keep the same sound but simply lengthen it. The sound is going to remain a, and now because I have 3 mori in there, I can add a circumflex, making it super a. Notice the iota didn't become subscript in this case because you can't put a iota subscript underneath a short vowel. Epsilon plus eta with a iota subscript is simply going to lengthen. In fact, you can't even tell that it's there because that epsilon with iota subscript and circumflex already has everything that it can have. So it's simply got another epsilon hiding in there. Now, this is a tricky one. What we're doing here first is combining omicron with omicron. Now, what sound should that make? How should that lengthen? Omicron plus omicron should render oo. So if we have oo, then what do we do with this iota? We have this crazy looking thing, ooey, which doesn't exist in Greek. What the Greeks do rather is squish it together, get rid of this upsilon, and lengthen the iota, and it becomes super oi. That's a little bit counterintuitive because you might think that you want an oo in there, so pay attention to that one. I'll make it bold. Omicron plus omega with iota subscript already has everything that it can possibly have. We can't make it look any bigger, so it's just the same thing with another omicron hiding inside there. Now, what if you are combining a vowel with a diphthong that contains an unlike sound? Here are the possible combinations. Now, because what we're doing is combining unlike sounds again, we're going to use the same principles as from above. So we'll steal this from here, just copy it and paste it down here so that we can look at it while we're doing this. Okay, now don't be confused, this is the same principle from above, it's not a new thing, we're just using it here for reference. So an alpha plus an epsilon is going to render a long alpha, and the iota will become subscript. So we end up with that, an alpha plus an eta with iota subscript. Because the alpha comes first, the alpha sound is going to win, and again we come up with that. Alpha plus an omicron. Now remember the principle from above, O sounds always win. So this alpha combines with this omicron into an omega, but it's going to have a iota subscript, and it's going to have a circumflex. So alpha plus oi becomes O. And alpha plus O can't get any longer, can't do anything more. So it just becomes O with an alpha embedded in there that you can't see. Epsilon plus I, epsilon combines with alpha to form eta. Remember that first sound wins, so the epsilon sound stays in that eta but lengthens, and we need to do something with that iota subscript. And since we've got 3 more I in there, we can show the circumflex. Moving on down. Now what should happen here? O sounds are always supposed to win, right? So this combination should become oo. And what's to become with this iota subscript? Something like that. But again we have this strange animal here which doesn't exist in Greek, ooey. Since that's too hard to say, let's smush it together, get rid of the upsilon, lengthen the iota, and we just get super oi. That one too is a little bit counterintuitive, so pay special attention to that one. This one is just as you might guess. We can't do anything more with that omega to make it longer, so it just stays the same with an invisible epsilon hiding inside. Omicron plus alpha gives us omega, and we need to put that iota as a subscript, and we can show a circumflex. So we get O. Now here again we have an O sound plus an epsilon, which should give us oo, and we have that iota. So we get this deal again. Get rid of that, lengthen this, oi. Epsilon plus oi, or O plus A, gives us the same thing, super oi. Now this is somewhat counterintuitive. I have an O sound and I have an eta, so I should be able to get an omega out of this with a iota subscript and a circumflex. But guess what? I don't. For some reason this eta sound, this A sound, is strong enough to counteract the strength of the omicron, and since it sounds so much like this, A, it comes to the same result. Super oi, again. This is very counterintuitive. The thing to remember is just Greek pays attention to sounds quite often, and A are so similar that when they're both combined with omicron, they render the same sound, oi. And there's really not much more to it than that. So let's see if we can get a look at this whole thing. The principles to remember are: like vowels lengthen. When you have unlike sounds, the O sound will always win. This is the one to watch out for. You get an omega most of the time, unless epsilon gets involved. If you have unlike sounds, it's the first sound that wins, so pay attention to the order of the combination. And if you're using a diphthong, and the sounds are like, they simply lengthen again. Watch out for this one here. And if the sounds are unlike, the first sound wins. Watch out for this one, and and this one.